The sandwich didn't look real. It looked like something scraped off the floor and served as a warning. Red sauce oozed over the metal tray, staining the bread until it collapsed into itself. The air was thick with a smell she hadn't known in years: cooked beef, onion, sugar. Too sweet, too rich, too wrong. They called it something strange: Sloppy Joe. The name meant nothing to Clara Vogt. To her, it sounded like a joke or a threat. A test. The mess hall roared around her, trays clattering, voices laughing, steam hissing from silver pots. American noise. American brightness. Too much of everything. 2 months earlier, she'd been dragged from the sea, lungs full of diesel and salt. Before that, she'd spent 3 years in a steel tube, the hum of engines vibrating through her bones. Silence was safety down there. Now the world was loud again, too alive, too warm. She stood between 2 women she barely knew, both from the communications corps, both staring straight ahead, their faces blank. They'd been trained not to react. But the smell of food was undoing them all. Clara's fingers trembled around her tray. Ahead she could see the sergeant, a broad man with forearms like tree trunks and a towel thrown over his shoulder. His face glistened with sweat as he ladled red sauce onto plates. "Keep it moving, ladies. Don't be shy. There's plenty, plenty." The word hit her like a slap. There hadn't been plenty of anything in Germany for years. Not food, not soap, not even quiet. She'd forgotten what a full kitchen smelled like: butter, onions, fat, things that belonged to another life. When her turn came, the man grinned down at her. Gold tooth flashing. "Sloppy Joe," he said, dropping a mound of meat and sauce onto her tray. "Best thing you'll eat all week." Clara blinked. Joe. She thought he was introducing himself. For a heartbeat, she almost answered. Then she realized he meant the food, the slop. The arrogance of naming waste after yourself made her jaw tighten. Typical Americans. Behind her, someone whispered in German, "Careful, it's spoiled." But her body was already acting without permission. 3 years of hunger had erased the luxury of hesitation. She picked up the bread, soft and warm in her hand, and took a bite. Sweetness. Her teeth stopped moving. Her brain stumbled. Sweetness didn't exist anymore, not in bread, not in life. But it was there. Tangy tomato, melted sugar, salt, real beef. Her tongue couldn't decide what to feel. She swallowed. Took another bite. Then another. The room faded. The tray trembled in her hands. Something inside her, something held tight since 1942, cracked. She didn't mean to cry. It happened without warning. Tears slid down her face, shocking in their warmth. A camera clicked somewhere. The sergeant stopped smiling. But Clara didn't see him anymore. She saw her mother's kitchen in Bremen, butter melting on rye bread. She saw her brother's empty bunk. She saw the lie of everything they'd believed about the enemy. The sauce ran down her chin. Her fingers shook. Around her, 200 German women stood still, holding their trays, watching one of their own fall apart over food. Clara didn't cry when her ship went down. Not when the Americans captured them. Not when they'd marched through the gates lined with barbed wire and strange kindness. But now, with sweetness on her tongue, she broke. The sergeant's voice softened. "It's just a sandwich, honey," but it wasn't. It was proof. Proof that mercy could taste like defeat. Proof that kindness could be more terrifying than hate. She took one last bite, swallowing everything she'd been told, and felt the truth burn all the way down. They hadn't lost today. They'd lost years ago. They just didn't know it until now. The transport truck hit a rut so deep it rattled Clara's teeth. Metal clanged against metal. Someone cursed softly in German, the sound swallowed by the engine's roar. Heat pressed down from above like a punishment. The air smelled of diesel, sweat, and something sweet. Pine or tar. She couldn't tell anymore. 200 women sat shoulder to shoulder, packed into 6 trucks that groaned under their weight. Their gray auxiliary uniforms clung to their skin, soaked through with humidity that felt alive. A few tried to fan themselves with ration cards, but the air was too thick to move. Clara stared through the slats in the truck bed. The world outside shimmered. Flat fields, tall grass, and the kind of sunlight that seemed to hum. Georgia, they said. A name she'd only known from maps and propaganda broadcasts. A fly landed on her wrist. She didn't brush it away. The energy it would take wasn't worth it. The woman beside her, Annalisa, had stopped speaking an hour ago. Her lips moved silently now, repeating the same phrase over and over. Nur noch ein bisschen. Just a little longer. When the truck finally lurched to a stop, silence fell like a command. Out. The order came in English, clipped but not cruel. Then again louder. Move, ladies. Clara's boots hit red clay that gave beneath her weight. It was soft and not like the frozen soil back home. She staggered, legs unsure after hours sitting cramped on metal. The heat hit next. Not just warmth, but a wall of air that wrapped around her, wet and heavy. Her lungs didn't know what to do with it. She blinked hard. Ahead, through the haze, something shimmered. Rows of white barracks, neat fences, guard towers that looked more like scaffolding than prisons. The place was clean, unreasonably clean. A sign read Fort Oglethorpe, Women's Detention Area. American soldiers stood at the gate, their uniforms crisp, their boots polished. But what struck her wasn't their weapons. It was their calm. No shouting, no dogs, no swinging rifle butts, just a group of young men and women watching the line of prisoners file in. Women, real soldiers wearing trousers and caps. Clara blinked again. Women giving orders. Another thing they'd said was impossible. One of them, a tall black sergeant with a kind face, stepped forward, holding out something white. Here, ma'am, she said gently. You'll want this. Towel's clean. You can wipe the road off before we process you. Clara froze. The word ma'am cut through her brain like static. The towel was soft. Real cotton. She turned it over in her hands like it might explode. It smelled faintly of soap. She hadn't touched something that clean since before the blockade. Behind her, someone nudged. The line moved. Processing. They were led through a wooden building where fans buzzed overhead. Names taken. Ranks recorded. Fingers pressed to ink and paper. A camera flash so bright it left ghosts on her eyelids. Name, an American clerk asked. Clara Vogt. Radio operator, second class. He nodded, typing quickly on a machine that clattered like gunfire. Any weapons? She almost laughed. No. They gave her a metal tag stamped with numbers. Not her number, not yet. Theirs. Then, for the first time in years, someone said it plainly. You're a prisoner of the United States. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention. The English was slow, careful, as if spoken for children, but the words landed heavy anyway. Prisoner. The formality of it made her throat tighten. Outside, the smell hit her before she saw it. Meat. Cooking meat. Her knees almost gave out. Mess hall's this way, someone said. They followed the path toward a long building with smoke rising from its vents. The sound inside was chaos, clanging trays, shouted orders, laughter. Laughter. Clara's stomach twisted again. The Americans were eating, loudly, carelessly, like it meant nothing. The women behind her went quiet, staring at the serving line where a red-faced man in an apron worked with the bored precision of habit. His ladle slapped against trays one after another. The smell was unbearable. Onions, beef, salt, fat. Her head spun. She remembered the last meal she'd eaten before capture. Boiled turnips and hard bread baked with sawdust filler. No butter, no warmth, just survival. Now, steam curled from piles of food so rich it felt obscene. A woman ahead of her whispered, "This is a test." "They'll see who takes too much," another muttered. "Or maybe it's a trick." Spoiled food. But Clara didn't hear them anymore. The noise around her faded into a hum, the way sound does underwater. All she could see was the ladle, the meat, the color red. Not of blood this time, but of sauce. When it landed on her tray, it splattered. The smell filled her lungs. "Sloppy Joe," the man said, almost cheerful. "Eat up, sweetheart." The women behind her went still. She didn't yet know what the words meant. But she knew this much. Whatever was happening here, whatever the Americans were feeding them, it was changing everything. The smell struck her first, a wave of cooked meat so rich it made her knees wobble. The noise of the mess hall faded into a low hum. For a heartbeat, Clara forgot to breathe. Around her, women stood frozen in the serving line, 200 gray uniforms in motionless disbelief. Their bodies remembered hunger before their minds did. The sergeant behind the counter moved like a machine, his apron stained, his arms the size of hams. "Keep it moving, ladies," he barked. But his voice wasn't cruel. It had the tone of someone who'd said the same words 1,000 times to 1,000 different soldiers. The woman ahead of Clara stepped forward, hands trembling as she held out her tray. A scoop of white fluff landed with a soft slap. Mashed potatoes, real ones, not the powdered substitute they'd learned to make from dried turnip. Then came the red mass, steaming, heavy, splattering sauce across the tray's metal surface. Clara's turn. The ladle descended. A chunk of meat, then sauce, more sauce, a small avalanche of it until it drowned the bun beneath. Red liquid spilled over the sides. The smell, sugar, vinegar, beef fat wrapped around her. Sloppy Joe, the sergeant said again, grinning like he'd just shared a secret. Best damn thing you'll eat this week. She didn't respond. The word Joe still sounded like a person, not a meal. The arrogance of it was almost unbearable. To name your food after yourself. Her fingers itched to drop the tray. They're testing us, she thought. They'll watch who eats like an animal, who still has pride. But pride couldn't feed you. She stepped away from the counter, moving toward a long wooden table where other women sat in silence. Trays clattered. Forks scraped. A fan buzzed overhead, slicing the heavy air into useless pieces. She stared down at her tray. The sauce had already soaked into the bread, softening it into mush. Her stomach growled audibly. The first bite was supposed to be cautious, controlled, just enough to prove it was edible. It wasn't cautious at all. The moment the food hit her tongue, her entire body stopped. The taste detonated like an explosion, salt, sugar, tang, fat. Every nerve ending lit up, her mouth flooded with memory. Her mother's kitchen, butter melting in a skillet, Sunday dinners before the bombing started. For a moment she was 20 again, laughing, not a prisoner, not anything. Then the present crashed back in. She swallowed hard. Another bite. Then another. By the third, her hands were shaking. The tray rattled against the table. She couldn't stop. Someone beside her whispered, "Careful, they'll think you're mad." Maybe she was. The sauce dripped from her fingers, warm and sticky. She licked it away, desperate not to waste a molecule. Around her, spoons and forks stilled. 200 women were watching one of their own lose control over food. Her throat made a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. Her shoulders heaved once, twice. Then the tears came. Sudden, unstoppable. She hadn't cried when her U-boat sank. Not when she'd been captured. Not when they'd lined her up under rifles. But now, with sweetness in her mouth and her body gave up. Across the hall, the sergeant froze mid-scoop. A woman with a camera, one of the American auxiliaries, lifted it instinctively. The shutter clicked. Clara's image would be caught there forever. Sauce on her chin, tears cutting lines through the dirt. Confusion and joy warring across her face. The humiliation burned worse than the heat. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle the sound. But it was too late. The dam had broken. Stop it, she told herself. Stop it, stop it, stop it. She couldn't. Every bite was forgiveness she didn't want. Every swallow a reminder of what had been stolen, not by war, but by lies. Around her, the other women stared. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the Americans went quiet. The mess hall became a cathedral of silence. Somewhere near the back, a voice whispered, "She's crying because it's sweet." Another voice, softer, "Because it's mercy." Clara didn't hear them. She kept eating. Each bite slower now, as if she could memorize the flavor. She could feel the weight of years breaking apart in her chest. All the hunger, all the pride, all the certainty, dissolving under red sauce and soft bread. When the sandwich was gone, she looked down at her empty tray. Her hands trembled so hard she nearly dropped it. It hit her then. The real punishment wasn't starvation. It was abundance. The realization that the enemy they'd been taught to hate could feed them better than their own country ever had. A sound left her throat. Not quite a sob, not quite laughter. Something between both. She wiped her face with the towel the sergeant had given her. It left streaks of tomato across the white. The man behind the counter finally said almost gently, "You'll be all right, miss." She didn't answer. Her voice was gone. She stared at the smear of red on the towel, at the sauce dripping to the floor, at the untouched bread of the woman beside her, and thought, they lied about everything. The lights buzzed overhead. The fan turned slowly, And for the first time since capture, Clara felt something close to peace, and hated herself for it. The barracks latrine smelled of soap, rust, and steam. Rows of basins lined the wall beneath a cracked mirror that warped every reflection. Clara leaned over the sink, rubbing her hands raw beneath the running water. The towel, still stained faintly red from the mess hall, hung around her neck. Outside, Georgia thunder grumbled across the sky. Rain would come soon. You could smell it in the air, heavy with electricity and wet earth. She was trying not to think about the sandwich, about how it had made her cry in front of 200 people. But every time she closed her eyes, she could still taste the sweetness. A knock echoed against the door. "Clara?" someone called in German. It was Britta, the youngest of the group, her voice hesitant. "Come, you need to see this." Clara sighed, wiped her face, and stepped into the corridor. The air was cooler here, humming with murmured voices. Women crowded around one of the bunks, their gray uniforms forming a ring of tension. In the middle sat Britta, cross-legged on the floor, a brown paper parcel in her lap. Red Cross markings. She tore it open with shaking fingers. The contents spilled out. Chocolate bars, soap, small packets of coffee substitute, and something wrapped in white paper. Britta unfolded it. The collective breath of the room caught. Stockings. Not the rough wool ones issued with their uniforms, but sheer, gleaming nylon that shimmered like water under the dim light. "My God," someone whispered. Britta held them up, staring. The fabric slipped through her fingers like silk. "They sent 3 pairs, she murmured. 3. Nobody moved. The sound of the rain starting outside filled the silence. For a moment, no one knew what to do. Then Greta, one of the older women, a former communications officer from Hamburg, stepped forward, her face pale. "May I touch them?" Britta hesitated, then nodded. Greta's hands trembled as she brushed the material.
"I haven't seen real stockings since 41, she said softly.
"We used to draw lines on our legs with pencil. To pretend." Laughter bubbled up, brittle and dangerous. Someone else pushed forward. "Please, just 1 pair. I'll trade for soap." "Soap?" Another woman scoffed. "I'll give you my locket." "My wedding ring." The air shifted. The desperation was palpable now. Hunger turned toward beauty. Britta clutched the remaining 2 pairs against her chest. "They're mine," she said, voice trembling. "The Red Cross sent them to me." "You don't understand," Greta snapped. "You're 23. I'm 37. My legs look like an old woman's. I just want to feel—" Her voice cracked. "Like myself again." The women were crowding closer now, the small barracks suddenly too small for so much longing. Hands reached out. Someone shoved. A cry went up as the package nearly tore. "Stop!" Britta shouted. "Please!" The scuffle froze when a new voice cut through the noise. Calm, firm, unmistakably American. What in God's name is going on here? Major Lucille Park stood in the doorway, rain dripping off her cap brim, clipboard under her arm. The women parted instinctively. The Major's presence was gravity itself. Her German was clear and deliberate. "Explain." No one spoke. Parks's gaze fell to the floor, to the nylon clutched in Britta's hands. Her brow lifted. "You're fighting over hosiery?" Britta's throat bobbed. "They sent them to me," she said quietly. Parks nodded once. Then she raised her voice, addressing the room. Effective immediately. "Every prisoner in this camp will receive 3 pairs of nylon stockings each week as part of standard provisions." Silence. The words hung in the damp air like a miracle no one believed. "Carla, a radar operator, who rarely spoke," I whispered. "Every week?" "That's what I said," Parks replied. Greta blinked hard. "That can't be right." "You don't have enough." Parks' mouth curved into a tired smile. "We've got more nylon than we know what to do with. We make parachutes out of it, and still have plenty left for every woman in Georgia to wear to church on Sunday." The barracks was utterly still. Rain drummed against the roof. The Major turned toward the door, pausing only once. "Next person who starts a fight over luxury goods spends a month cleaning latrines." "Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," came the collective murmur. Parks nodded, satisfied, and left. When the sound of her boots faded, no one moved. The women stood among the bunks like statues, staring at the shimmering fabric that now represented something far larger than comfort. Britta sat back down slowly, the nylons folded in her lap. Her fingers stroked the soft material as though it were alive. Clara watched from across the room. The faces around her said everything: disbelief, envy, awe. The Americans had too much. Too much food, too much fabric, too much everything, and for the first time Clara felt the weight of that truth settle inside her. Heavy, unshakable, terrifying. Outside, the thunder rolled closer. The sound of rain became a steady hymn against the tin roof. No one spoke for a long time. Then Greta whispered, barely audible, "They live in a world that never ran out." No one argued. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the Georgia air thick and sweet like wet sugar. Clara woke to the sound of paper rustling, the Red Cross packages being passed down the line. Each woman received one, each package identical: soap, chocolate, a tin of powdered milk, and at the bottom, wrapped neatly in white paper, the impossible: 3 pairs of nylon stockings. No one moved at first. The silence inside the barracks was sacred, the stillness of people witnessing something that shouldn't exist. Then Carla spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Every week," she said. "Every week." Greta sat on her bunk, her hands shaking as she unwrapped the first pair. The fabric slid across her fingers like light. "In Berlin," she whispered, "you could trade a single pair for a month's food rations." Britta gave a hollow laugh. "Here they hand them out like bread." Clara sat at the edge of her bunk, holding her parcel, the nylons folded neatly inside. She couldn't bring herself to touch them. They were too soft, too beautiful, too wrong. She remembered the Major's voice from the night before, calm, steady, so sure. "We make parachutes out of nylon and still have enough for every woman in Georgia to wear to church on Sunday." That sentence had been circling in her head all night like a haunting. She finally lifted the nylons. They caught the light streaming through the window and shimmered gold. Something broke in her chest. Across the barracks, Greta was crying quietly, her face turned to the wall. The sound didn't carry far, just a small, fragile weeping that made the others go still. No one mocked her. No one dared. Britta stood and pulled the stockings up her bare legs. The fabric whispered against her skin. The room collectively inhaled. "They fit," she said softly. "Perfectly." Her voice cracked on the word perfectly. That was all it took. The tension that had filled the barracks since capture, months of fear and hunger and disbelief, began to unravel. Carla started to laugh. Then another woman joined in. It wasn't joy. It was hysteria in disguise. Greta turned around, eyes swollen, and said what they were all thinking. "They're giving us luxury. To prisoners." Clara looked down at her hands, still clutching the fabric. "It isn't luxury to them," she murmured. "That's the point." Heads turned toward her. "They have so much they don't even notice when they give it away," she continued. "We ration soap. They throw it out when it melts too small. We trade rings for bread. They feed their prisoners steak." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "They didn't lie to their people, Greta. We did." No one argued. For a long time, the only sound was the rain dripping from the eaves outside and the soft, ghostly sound of fabric stretching as Britta ran her fingers along her knees. Finally, someone whispered, "What happens when we go home?" No one answered. Because home, the word itself, no longer meant what it once did. When the evening horn sounded, signaling lights out, most of the women lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The barracks creaked softly, the fans turning slow circles above their heads. Clara rolled onto her side, the parcel of nylon still under her pillow. She pressed her cheek against the rough fabric of the blanket, listening to the quiet breathing around her. Somewhere down the row, Britta whispered a prayer in the dark. Not for safety, not for freedom, but for understanding. Clara closed her eyes. She thought about the man in the mess hall, the towel, the sauce, the kindness that had undone her. And now, these stockings. 3 fragile pairs that somehow weighed more than guilt itself. In Berlin, her mother used to patch old ones with needle and thread, rationing fabric like gold. She remembered her mother's hands, thin and tired, smoothing the nylon flat across her lap. She'd said, "A woman must always keep her dignity, even in hunger." Clara wondered what her mother would think now. Her daughter wearing the enemy's stockings, eating the enemy's food, sleeping on the enemy's mattress, and realizing that the enemy's kindness had done what no army ever could. It had made her doubt. Outside, the guard's radio played faint music, a slow American tune full of warmth and melancholy. The melody drifted across the compound like a lullaby. Clara listened until her eyes blurred. The world she'd known, of shortages, fear and certainty, had ended somewhere between a sandwich and a pair of stockings. And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether the war had really ended at all. The projector rattled like a machine gun in slow motion. Its beam cut through the dust-heavy air, painting the barracks wall with flickering light. Re-education, the Americans called it. To Clara and the others, it felt more like punishment. 200 women sat stiff-backed on wooden benches inside the converted storage hall. A few fanned themselves with paper programs. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and something faintly sweet, the syrupy scent of the drink the guards carried in glass bottles. The film began with bold white letters. America at work. Factories appeared on screen. Endless lines of women in overalls operating machines that hummed like orchestras. Conveyor belts moved in perfect rhythm, boxes stacked higher than their heads. The camera panned across smiling faces, confident, clean, purposeful. At first, the POWs sat expressionless. They had seen propaganda films before, German ones filled with promises of victory and perfection. But this film felt different. It wasn't staged glory, it was ordinary. Then the camera caught something strange. A man walked through the background carrying a wooden crate. He set it down, wiped his hands on a rag, and opened one of the glass bottles inside. He drank right there on the factory floor. No one stopped him. Carla frowned. He's drinking? While working? Greta leaned forward, squinting. That would never happen at Krupp. They'd shoot him. Clara didn't answer. She was watching the liquid fizzing in the bottle, the bubbles catching the light like glass beads. It looked alive. The film continued. Wheat fields golden under the sun, supermarkets with shelves overflowing, families laughing around tables that sagged under food. Clara felt her chest tighten. It was too much, too easy, too clean. When the film ended, the lights came up. The American projectionist, a tired-looking woman with hair pinned in perfect curls, stretched and smiled. Any questions? For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Carla raised her hand, hesitating. Her German accent made her words sharp and uneven. The man, in the factory, what was he drinking? The projectionist's grin widened. Coca-Cola, honey. The words meant nothing. Seeing their confusion, she added, It's a soft drink. Want to try one? A murmur ran through the hall. 10 minutes later, they were outside on the parade ground, squinting in the sunlight as American soldiers wheeled out wooden crates packed with ice. The bottles clinked together, the green glass fogging in the heat. Each woman was handed one, cold, sweating, impossibly heavy in her hand. Clara turned hers over. The label was painted in looping red letters she couldn't read. The bubbles rose to the surface, dancing against the cap. Carla whispered, It's moving. Maybe it's spoiled, Greta muttered. Food shouldn't move. But the projectionist, the same woman from the film hall, just laughed. Go on, girls. Twist the cap. It won't bite. The metal seal gave way with a hiss, a sharp, startling sound like escaping gas. Several women flinched. A few dropped their bottles entirely, the glass shattering against the dirt. Clara brought hers cautiously to her lips. The first sip burned, cold fire down her throat, sweet, violently sweet, with something sharp underneath. Bubbles burst on her tongue like static, her eyes watered. Her body shuddered. She gasped for air, and then, without meaning to, she laughed, a small, broken laugh that sounded like relief. Carla wasn't so lucky. She drank too fast. 2 swallows in, she doubled over, coughing, then vomiting into the grass. The projectionist jogged over, half concerned, half amused. Easy there. That's the sugar talking. Carla wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, eyes wild. More, she croaked. Please. I want more. The woman blinked, then grinned. Well, would you look at that? Girl's got herself an American habit already. The second bottle went down slower. This time, Carla didn't cough. She sat cross-legged in the sun, taking small sips, staring at nothing. Clara sat beside her, nursing her own drink. The glass was slick with condensation. She tilted it in her hands, watching the bubbles rise. They give this to workers, she asked quietly. The projectionist shrugged. Sure do, everyone drinks it. It's cheap, the word didn't make sense. Nothing that tasted like this should be cheap. Clara took another sip. The cold hit her teeth, the sweetness lingering. Her body, still malnourished from months of deprivation, absorbed it like medicine. The caffeine she didn't yet know by name made her pulse race. Around her, the women drank in silence. Some smiled faintly. Others stared at the bottles as if afraid they'd vanish. Carla set her empty bottle down carefully, her hands trembling. "They drink this while working," she said, voice quiet, awed. "They don't ration it. They don't measure it." "No," Clara said softly. "They don't." The sunlight caught the green glass between them, scattering light across the dirt like shattered jewels. She thought of home, of ration cards, of coffee made from roasted acorns, of sugar that came once a year, and she thought of this, a country so rich it could make sweetness ordinary. Somewhere deep inside her, something shifted, not envy, not admiration, something harder to name. It felt like the first crack in a wall she hadn't realized she'd built around her own faith. The sound of fizzing filled the silence. The bottles clinked softly as the soldiers packed the crates back onto the truck. A few half-empty ones lay scattered on the ground, bubbles still fizzing faintly in the heat. Clara watched the condensation dry on her empty bottle, leaving behind a faint ring of moisture in the Georgia dust. She twisted the metal cap in her fingers, its ridged edges biting her skin. She slipped it into her pocket. She didn't know why. Carla sat beside her, back against the barracks wall, the second bottle half finished. She was sipping slowly now, learning to control the burn, her eyes distant. "They drink this every day," Carla said, "not just on holidays." "Every day," Clara nodded. She'd overheard one of the American guards talking earlier. There were factories that made nothing but Coca-Cola. Entire buildings devoted to sweetness. The thought made her dizzy. "Maybe it's a trick," Greta said. She stood nearby, arms crossed, still skeptical. "They show us plenty, so we'll tell everyone back home. Propaganda." Carla didn't look up. "Then why do they give it to us?" No one answered. The projectionist, the American woman with the perfect curls, strolled by, humming. "Remember to bring those bottles back, ladies," she called. "We recycle them, recycling sweetness." Even their waste had order. That night, long after lights out, Clara lay awake in her bunk. The barracks was quiet except for the slow creak of wood and the rhythmic breathing of the others. She reached under her pillow and touched the bottle cap again. The metal was cool, sharp at the edges. She ran her thumb over the embossed letters. It was proof, not just of the drink, but of everything that came with it, the ease, the casual excess, the comfort. She closed her eyes and saw the factory film again. The man drinking on the job, the shelves full of food, the smiling faces untouched by war. She wondered if he ever thought about people like her. Hungry, locked away, believing lies about a starving America. Her chest ached across the barracks. She heard soft movement. Carla was awake too. "Can't sleep?" Clara whispered. "No." "What are you thinking?" Carla hesitated. "That we never had a chance." The words hung there, sharp and final. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, Clara saw her silhouette, knees pulled to her chest, bottle cap glinting between her fingers. "They told us America was weak," Carla said, soft that they were collapsing. "But they had enough sugar to drown us, enough steel to build ships and bottles. They didn't starve their people to win." Her voice cracked. "We did." Clara said nothing. Somewhere outside, a guard's radio played an American tune, slow, mournful, full of steel guitar and loneliness. Carla listened for a long time, then whispered, "Even their sadness sounds free." Clara turned her face toward the wall. She didn't want to cry again. In the days that followed, the Coca-Cola deliveries became routine. Once a week, crates of bottles packed in ice were wheeled onto the parade ground. The Americans called it a morale exercise. The women lined up, hesitant at first, then eager, like schoolgirls waiting for sweets. Every week, Carla kept one bottle cap. She hid them in her footlocker, under a false bottom she'd built from cardboard. By the third week, she had 5. By the 5th, she had a dozen. The other women laughed at her. "What will you do with them? Build jewelry?" But Carla only smiled. "Evidence," she said simply. The word unsettled Clara. Evidence of what? That mercy existed? That America was too rich to hate? That their world had collapsed not with bombs but with kindness? By summer, the women had gained weight. Their cheeks had color again. The American uniforms they'd been issued fit better now. Some had started humming along to the music from the guards' radios. The camp had changed. But inside Clara, something darker grew, a gnawing question that refused to fade. If everything they'd been told was a lie, what did that make them? Patriots? Victims, fools? She didn't know. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the barbed wire, she saw Carla sitting alone outside the barracks, a small pile of bottle caps gleaming beside her. "They shine," Carla said, turning one in the fading light. Like medals, Clara stared at the caps. Their ridges caught the sun just like the iron crosses once had. Maybe, she thought, these were the only medals that mattered now. Proof of survival, of adaptation, of awakening. The sky darkened. The radio music carried again, slow, wistful, a man's voice singing about home. Carla whispered, "Do you think they'll ever let us go back?" Clara didn't answer. She just looked at the bottle cap in Carla's palm, glowing faintly in the dying light, and thought that even if they did go home, they would never truly return. They had seen too much and they had tasted the truth, a cold, sweet, and undeniable. The truck smelled of hay and motor oil. Clara sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, watching the Georgia countryside roll past through a cracked windshield. The morning light poured over fields so green it hurt her eyes. 3 weeks earlier, Major Parks had posted a notice on the mess hall board: work detail assignments, civilian agriculture support. When Clara's name appeared on the list, she thought it was a mistake. Prisoners didn't just leave camp. But the following morning, they'd handed her gloves, a ration lunch, and a slip of paper, with an address scrawled on it. The driver beside her was a man in his 50s, his face lined and sunburned. A faded hat shaded his eyes. He hadn't said much since they left Fort Oglethorpe. The truck hit a bump. Clara's hand shot out instinctively to steady herself. "Don't worry," he said, voice low, drawling. "She rattles, but she won't throw you." His accent rolled like warm gravel. It took Clara a moment to translate. "You would call her she?" He smiled faintly. "Trucks, horses, ships, anything that runs, breathes, or bucks gets a name." He tapped the dashboard. "This one's called Grace." She almost laughed. It had been a long time since she'd heard anyone name a machine with affection. They turned onto a dirt road. A wooden sign came into view: Mill Creek Ranch, S 1919. The truck shuddered to a stop beside a weathered barn. The smell of hay and manure mixed with the sweetness of morning. Birds scattered from the rafters as the engine went quiet. The man climbed down, his limp noticeable now. "Name's Thomas Reed," he said, offering his hand. "You the radio girl?" Clara hesitated before shaking it. "Yes, Communications Corps." He nodded toward the barn. "You ever work with horses?" She blinked. "My father raised them. In East Prussia." "Well," Reed said, motioning her inside. "Guess that makes two of us who know what we're doing." Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the comforting scent of animals. Dust motes floated in beams of sunlight. A chestnut mare stood in the nearest stall, her front leg favoring one side. "She threw a shoe yesterday," Reed said. "Farrier's 2 towns over. You think you can check her?" Clara approached the mare slowly, murmuring softly in German. Instinct, not thought. The horse flicked her ears forward but didn't pull away. Clara crouched, running her hand down the animal's leg, feeling for heat, swelling, pain. "She's sore," Clara said. "Needs rest, and a new shoe." Reed raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're not a vet?" She smiled faintly. "My father used to say horses tell you what's wrong if you listen." Reed chuckled. "Sounds like a smart man." He tossed her a ring of keys. "Tools are in the tack room. 3rd cabinet." For the next hour, Clara worked in silence. The forge hissed. Metal clanged softly against anvil and hoof. Her hands moved without hesitation. File, measure, fit, nail. The rhythm came back easily, the muscle memory of a childhood before submarines and ration cards. When she finished, she stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. Reed walked a slow circle around the mare, inspecting her work. Then he started clapping. "Perfect," he said. "God almighty, girl, you could make a living with that." The sound startled her. Praise had become a foreign language. "In Germany," she said softly, "they told us women shouldn't work with animals. Too dirty, too hard," Reed grunted. "In America, we don't much care who does the work, long as it's done right." Something in her chest loosened at those words. The days that followed blurred into sun and dust. She learned to rope, to mend fences, to drive a tractor that rattled like an angry train. Reed wasn't talkative, but his silence was kind. He shared his coffee at sunrise and never asked about her past. Sometimes he'd bring a small radio into the barn, a battered Zenith that crackled with static until music came through. Hank Williams. Patsy Cline. Songs about lost love, distance, hope. "This is country music," Reed said one morning, tightening a saddle strap. "You like it?" Clara listened to the twang of the steel guitar, the ache in the man's voice. "It sounds sad." He laughed. "That's how we know it's honest." She thought about that for a long time. At night, back in the small cabin near the barn, she'd write letters she never sent. To her mother, to her brother, to no one. Letters about horses and heat and coffee. About a country that seemed to live in color while hers still dreamed in gray. Each dawn she woke before sunrise, the sound of roosters breaking the stillness. She'd breathe in the smell of hay and warm air, and for a few fleeting minutes, she forgot she was a prisoner. By the second week, Reed stopped locking the barn at night. "Don't figure you'll run off," he said casually. "Nowhere to go." He was right. One evening, as the sun dropped low, Reed leaned on the fence beside her, watching the horses graze. "War's over, you know," he said quietly. "Heard it on the radio. Japan surrendered." Clara stared at the horizon. "Then it's really finished." "Maybe," Reed said. "But endings and peace ain't always the same thing." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of rain. Clara didn't answer. She just kept watching the fields, endless, golden, free, and wondered what peace was supposed to feel like. By late August, the heat had turned heavy enough to bend the horizon. Days bled into one another, the hiss of grasshoppers, the hum of cicadas, the long hours spent mending fences and hauling hay. Clara's skin had darkened, her hands had toughened. She no longer looked like the pale officer who'd arrived with stiff posture and fear in her eyes. She moved differently now, slower, grounded, unafraid. Thomas Reed noticed. He didn't say it. But she could tell by the small changes, the way he handed her tools without speaking, how he'd wait for her opinion before tightening a bit or choosing a feed. They worked in rhythm, two people who understood silence better than words. One afternoon, while repairing a gate at the far edge of the pasture, Reed straightened and said, "You ever think about what you'll do when they send you back?" The question startled her. She hadn't thought about it, not really. "I suppose I'll go home," she said after a pause. "If home still exists." He nodded slowly. "Heard Berlin's in ruins." Clara looked away. "Then maybe I'll rebuild it." Reed set down his hammer. "You could do that." He hesitated, then added, "Or you could stay." She blinked. "Stay? Plenty of farms need help," he said simply. "Work's honest, pays fair. Ain't nobody here that'd care where you were born if you pull your weight." Clara didn't know what to say. It was the first time an American had spoken to her as if she had a choice, as if her future weren't a sentence. "But a door. Why would you offer that?" she asked quietly. "I'm still a prisoner," Reed shrugged. "You're more useful than most free men I've hired. Figure that counts for something." He turned away, pretending to inspect the fence post, but the softness in his voice betrayed him. They worked in silence for a while. The sun dipped lower, throwing long shadows across the field. The horses moved slowly through the grass, tails swishing. After a while, Reed said, "You remind me of my daughter." Clara froze. "Your daughter?" "She's about your age," he said. "Married a Navy man. Lives up in North Carolina now. Haven't seen her since before the war." There was a quiet ache in his tone that caught her off guard. "Do you miss her?" He nodded once. "Every day." Clara looked down at her hands, scarred, sunburned, rough. She thought of her own father, buried somewhere in the ruins of Königsberg. "I miss mine too," she said softly. Reed smiled faintly. "Guess that makes us even." That night after supper, he brought out a record player, a small wooden box with a crank and a needle so worn it hissed with every spin. The first song was slow, full of strings and nostalgia, something called Moonlight Serenade. Reed leaned back in his chair, boots crossed at the ankle, eyes half closed. "Glenn Miller," he said. "Man could make a horn sound like forgiveness." Clara sat across from him, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. She listened to the melody swirl through the cabin, soft, longing, impossibly tender. It felt like being forgiven for things no one had spoken aloud. When the record ended, Reed said quietly. You can stay out here for as long as they'll let you. The camp will send trucks for supplies every week. I'll tell them I need extra help. She looked up sharply. You do that? He met her eyes. Already did. Something inside her shifted, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Gratitude was something she'd been taught to mistrust. Instead, she said, The mare's healing well. She'll be ready for work soon. Reed smiled as if he understood the deflection. Then I guess I'll need you around a bit longer. Outside, crickets sang. The night air smelled of cut hay and warm dust. When she finally returned to the small cabin behind the barn, Clara paused in the doorway. The stars above were enormous, bright enough to erase the blackness of the sky. She thought of Berlin, of air raids and smoke, of nights when stars were a luxury they couldn't afford to see. Now they burned overhead like reminders of what was lost and what might still be found. She lay down on her narrow bed, the hum of the night wrapping around her, and realized something that made her chest ache. For the first time since the war began, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. A young corporal from Fort Oglethorpe arrived in a dusty jeep, handed Thomas Reed an envelope, and waited silently as he read. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, though his face stayed calm. When he looked up, Clara knew. They're rotating the work details, he said quietly. You're to report back to camp tomorrow. The words hit harder than she expected. She'd always known this day would come, but knowing it didn't make it easier. Clara set down the brush she'd been using to clean the mare's flank. The barn was suddenly too still. Dust floated in the shafts of sunlight like slow snow. I see, she said softly. Reed folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. Paper says it's policy. Nothing to be done about it. She nodded, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. Of course. They worked in silence the rest of the afternoon, fixing the troughs, stacking feed, pretending that the day wasn't slipping away. Every sound felt amplified. The rasp of wood, the clink of tools, the soft huff of the horse in her stall. By sundown, the sky burned orange over the fields. Reed leaned against the fence, chewing on a blade of grass, staring at nothing. Guess I got used to having someone who knew what they were doing, he said finally. Clara tried to smile. You'll find another worker. He shook his head. Not like you. They stood there a long time, neither sure how to fill the silence. The air buzzed with cicadas. Somewhere far off, a truck rumbled along the road, carrying laughter and music that belonged to someone else's life. Reed reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small square envelope. Here, he said. Before you go. Clara hesitated, then took it. Inside was a photograph, black and white, edges curling from age. It showed the barn behind them, the field stretching out endless and golden. And in the corner, captured mid-laugh, was her. Sleeves rolled up, hair loose, sunlight catching the edge of her face. She gasped softly. When did you? Last week, he said. Had a friend with a camera come by for supplies. Figured you might want to remember something that wasn't behind wire. Her throat tightened. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. The image didn't look like her. Not the soldier. Not the prisoner. But someone caught between both, standing in a place that felt almost free. Thank you, she whispered. Reed looked down, scuffing his boot against the dirt. Don't thank me. You earned it. He hesitated, then added, You'll go home soon, they say. Back to Germany. Clara's eyes dropped to the photograph again. If there's anything left to go back to. Reed took off his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. You'll rebuild it. People like you always do, she smiled faintly. You make it sound easy. Not easy, he said. Just possible. The word lingered in the air like the last note of a song. That night, she couldn't sleep. The radio on the porch played low. A song she'd come to recognize. I'll be seeing you. The voice was warm, aching, full of something that hurt to hear. She sat on the porch steps, the photo in her hand, watching the fields turn silver under moonlight. The crickets sang, and from somewhere inside the barn came the soft sound of a horse shifting in its stall. Reed opened the screen door behind her. Figured I'd find you here, he said. He held 2 mugs of coffee. She took one. It was too hot, too bitter, and perfect. They sat in silence, listening to the world breathe. Finally, he said, "When they come tomorrow, I'll drive you to the gate myself." She turned toward him. "You don't have to. I know." He smiled faintly. "But I will." For a long time, neither spoke. The night stretched wide and forgiving around them. When she finally went inside, she placed the photograph under her pillow, next to the Coca-Cola cap she'd kept from her first day at camp. Two fragments from two different worlds, one metallic and cold, one soft and fading. But together, they told the truth of who she'd become. The next morning, the truck arrived at sunrise. The guard stood by the gate, waiting. Reed lifted her suitcase into the back himself. "Keep the picture," he said. "And if you ever find yourself in a place that feels too small, look at it. Remember that the world's bigger than fences." Clara nodded, unable to speak. As the truck pulled away, she looked back one last time. Reed stood beside the barn, hat in hand, framed by light. The mare leaned over the fence behind him, her mane brushing his shoulder like a farewell. The photograph pressed against her chest through the fabric of her uniform. She didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in another life. Instead, she whispered under her breath, in German, so the guards wouldn't understand, "Thank you for teaching me how to live again." The wind caught her words and carried them away across the fields, disappearing into the morning. The train shuddered as it crossed the Rhine. Clara sat by the window, her reflection flickering over the dark water. Smoke trailed past the glass like ghosts, the engine breathing in slow, heavy sighs. Germany stretched beyond, not a country, but a wound. Villages flattened into gray scars, forests thinned by hunger, fields overgrown where farms once stood, and people, so many people, walking with nothing, searching for anything. She pressed her palm against the window pane, the glass cold against her skin. In her other hand, tucked safely inside her coat pocket, she felt the small shape of the photograph, worn now at the edges, and the round imprint of a single Coca-Cola cap, her two souvenirs of defeat. The train slowed as it approached Bremen, the platform a blur of motion. Refugees, soldiers, widows clutching bundles. A voice shouted orders. The doors opened. Clara stepped out, the air thick with coal smoke and rain. The city smelled of damp ash and memory. She walked slowly through the streets she once knew. The bakery where she'd bought bread as a girl was gone. Only the smell of soot and brick dust remained. The church steeple leaned like a broken tooth. Everywhere she looked, she saw faces that didn't look up, eyes that had learned to stop hoping. She found her mother's building at last, or what was left of it. The front half was gone, replaced by a pile of bricks and a rusted bicycle wheel. She climbed the stairs carefully. Halfway up, she found the door to their old flat still hanging by one hinge. Inside, silence. Dust coated the floor like snow. A single photograph still clung to the wall. Her father in uniform, smiling, his eyes confident, unbroken. She sat down on the floor beside the cold hearth, too tired to cry. For a long time, she just listened to the wind outside, the creak of wood, the sound of her own breath. Then she reached into her coat and took out the two objects, the photograph from Georgia and the Coca-Cola cap. She laid them side by side on the cracked floorboards. One was soft and faded, a memory of sunlight and open fields. The other was hard, cold, metallic, a piece of something that had survived the fire. They didn't belong here in this ruined place. But neither did she. She turned the photo toward the light leaking through the broken window. There she was, sleeves rolled up, hair loose, smiling without permission. It didn't look like a prisoner's smile. It looked like life. She whispered to herself, "You survived." Then, after a long pause, "Now live." The wind caught the edge of the photograph and lifted it slightly as if agreeing. Outside, a church bell rang. Just one note, cracked and uncertain, but real. She gathered the photo and the cap, tucking them back into her coat pocket, and stood. When she stepped outside, the rain had started, light, soft, washing the dust from the broken stones. She walked without knowing where she was going, just forward. Past rubble, past empty windows, past everything that used to mean home. As she crossed the bridge out of the city, she heard laughter. Children playing in puddles, their shoes soaked, their joy defiant. She stopped, watched, then smiled. The world wasn't healed, but it was alive. That was enough. From her pocket, she took the Coca-Cola cap once more and turned it between her fingers. The ridges caught the weak light of afternoon, a reminder of what mercy looked like. What kindness could do, how a sandwich, a drink, a photograph, simple things, could break the hardest walls. She dropped the cap into the river. It hit the surface, flashed once, and disappeared beneath the ripples. Somewhere far away, she imagined it washing up on another shore, gleaming under the sun of a country that had once been her enemy, now part of her story. Clara turned toward the east where gray clouds rolled over the ruins. Her coat flapped in the wind. She started walking again. No uniform, no orders, no fences, just a woman finally free. The rain fell harder, erasing her footprints as she went. Narrator, calm, reflective. Clara Vogt never forgot the taste of that first meal, or the kindness that came with it. In a war built on hatred, it wasn't force or punishment that changed her. It was mercy. It was a sandwich called Sloppy Joe, a bottle of Coca-Cola, a pair of nylon stockings, small things that told her the truth about a world she'd been taught to despise. Somewhere, in every conflict, there's a moment, like hers, when one act of humanity weighs more than all the propaganda ever written. If stories like Clara's move you, if you believe history is more than battles and dates, then help keep these memories alive. Subscribe for more forgotten stories of World War II, where humanity, even in captivity, refused to die.